Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Another day, another massive controversy here in the Formula 1 world. Lewis Hamilton was initially fined €50,000 for crossing a live track after his turn 1 lap 1 incident with George Russell at the Qatar Grand Prix, and that seemed to be the end of the discussion. The FIA though, the governing body, have said today they are revisiting this incident, potentially looking to impose further penalties on Hamilton. They say the reason for this is because of his status as a role model. Is this just clumsy wording, or are they literally saying, the governing body, that they're treating Hamilton differently because he is Sir Lewis Hamilton? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, this is Daniel Ricciardo back in a Red Bull for the first time in a little while at the very least, and he's doing some PR stuff, an absolute PR dream of course. I think he was in Nashville yesterday, maybe some other things as well, doing some donuts. You guys know how it is, with the cowboy hat on, and clearly getting ready for the US Grand Prix in Texas, which he is believed to be returning for. Unless anything's gone drastically wrong with his hands, it should be fixed, it's all okay. Liam Lawson will be out of the cockpit of the AlphaTauri, and it will be Daniel Ricciardo back in. But let's dive into this drama then, right? So we saw the first live incident happened, there was lots to say on that, as we talked about over the last few days, but then the other part of it was that Hamilton got out of his car, and he walked back across the track while it was still live. Now, a safety car had been deployed, so the cars were not going at racing speed, they were driving around the track at much reduced pace, and Hamilton, after getting out here, usually what you're meant to do, walk to the side of the track, get through one of the holes in the fence, and then someone on a scooter will take you back to the pits, so you can do the media. That's usually how it goes, that's what you're meant to do. But Hamilton went across the track, and obviously he saw those cars come in, thought it was absolutely fine, and I imagine that he was, focused much more on, how did this happen? Did I make a mistake? Was it George's fault? And he wasn't really thinking about crossing the track live. But of course, this is, no one condones this, no one says this is a good idea. There's been plenty of instances in the past where, well, really decades ago at this point, but to be fair, I think there was even an incident a few days ago, someone pushed their cart back on track and they got hit and their leg broke or something like that. There's been some fatal incidents where people have been on track they're not meant to in the past, so, not something that anyone supports, and everyone was like, yep, sure, Hamilton gets a fine, gets a reprimand, and he was down with it as well. He was like, yeah, big mistake from me, my bad, guys, very much apologetic. So, at the time, they say that car 44 came to the hearing, was very apologetic, knows the situation could have been dangerous. That's what the steward said, and therefore significant fine, €50,000, €25,000 up front, €25,000 suspended, and then a reprimand, bearing in mind that receiving a certain number of reprimands, etc., etc. 18.2. I don't think anyone really had an issue with this. Where it gets problematic though is when we get to today. I don't know if the FIA have just been bored over the last week or so, they were looking for something to do, but they're now saying that the FIA notes that Hamilton was apologetic during the subsequent steward's hearing to the incident, and realised that it was a serious safety breach. And this is really interesting just because there's many incidents in recent memory, and we'll look at a few in a couple of minutes, that were also an incident of the same thing, a driver crossing a live track, that weren't even investigated. So that maybe raises its own questions, but as they then go on to say, however, in view of his role model status, the FIA is concerned about the impression his actions may have created on younger drivers. So where to even begin with this? There's a lot to say on it, as I'm sure you guys will be putting in the comments section below. Just to clarify everything that is currently understood, it's unknown whether they're looking to therefore put a more, severe punishment in place. Chris Medland says that it's unclear if they're looking to add to Hamilton's original punishment, but the fact that they're re-reviewing this matter and saying that, well, because he's a role model, we actually, we might need to deal with this more severely, is fascinating, because all of these drivers are role models, and, well, we'll certainly talk about that. The other piece as well is that just because you see a driver walking across the track, maybe there is an implication that for young drivers, for kids, they'll see Hamilton walk across the track and they'll think, oh, well, he's done it, it's okay for me to do it as well. I get that, but it's like, Hamilton's not the only one that's done this in very recent memory, but those incidents were not even really talked about or even discussed. And maybe there's other reasons for that, and we'll get into that in a second, but still definitely feels like there's a general perception, there's a feeling that the governing body and the decision makers, certain drivers, for good or for ill, have been treated differently to expectations and to other drivers over the last decades, but even just the last few years, this doesn't help alleviate those concerns when you get these things on Hamilton and not necessarily elsewhere. Now, Alex Brundle, son of Martin Brundle, commentator of Formula 2 and elsewhere, said that, it's clumsy wording. It very much is clumsy wording, but do they actually mean it as they say they mean it? Because as Will Buxton says, this is very troubling to effectively imply that the reason why this is a problem is because Hamilton is a role model above and beyond other role models. Every Formula 1 driver is a role model to somebody. Yes, Hamilton is the biggest figure in the sport, has the most star power, and I guess is the biggest role model, but every driver is a role model to somebody, even, in the lower categories as well. So I don't really understand this whole idea that, oh, well, Hamilton's a role model, but, is Verstappen not? Obviously, Verstappen is, but we'll see in a second that Verstappen did what Hamilton did, but it wasn't even talked about a couple of years ago. So, as Buxton says as well, like when Grosjean was banned in 2012, there was a feeling that, because championship contenders were involved, therefore basically different decisions based on who was involved. And you don't want to have a situation where rules are applied differently based on the driver in play. If there was a deliberate contact or if there was, a penalty-worthy contact in a race, it shouldn't matter if that's taken out the championship leader or if it's taken out someone in P18. Theoretically, we know that in reality, that's not always how things go. But the rules should be applied equally, regardless of the driver in question, especially when it's not even position in the championship related. This is merely on who the driver is as a person. So this is when a lot of people were up in arms about this, and I totally understand why, that this is being scrutinized heavily by the FIA, the governing body, but yet here are two incidents in just the last 2 years where other drivers have walked across a live track and have received... They didn't even investigate it, right? Now, I get it. This is Monza 2021, where there was plenty else for the stewards to be looking at between, there was all the drama, who was at fault, Hamilton, Verstappen, whatever. This is Turn 1 Monza 2021, if you guys are unfamiliar. The other drama was that, as you can see here, Hamilton's trying to reverse out, but he's stuck under Verstappen's car. Verstappen didn't check on Hamilton, and there was all the talks about that because, Hamilton had Verstappen's car planted on his head, and if not for the halo, Hamilton probably gets a broken neck from this contact. So many people were saying, and Hamilton himself said that he was surprised that Verstappen didn't come over to check on him, but as we can see, Verstappen just walks off, and there's this poor steward in the background here who's trying his very best to tell Verstappen to come back, but he doesn't listen. He just walks straight across the track. Now, this wasn't a red flag, so, the race isn't neutralized. This is a safety car. There are cars coming back around the track here in a second as Verstappen's walking across the live track, but, yeah, not investigated. I don't even know if they noted this or if they even talked about it, to be honest. And, okay, sure, you can say the stewards were different then, different, people involved, but still, if you're going to say Hamilton, if that's a massive talking point and remains this way for the Qatar Grand Prix, that Hamilton's getting punished and maybe more severely for it, the fact that, and they're revisiting that 1 week after, okay, it's a bit different to revisiting something 2 years after, but still, the point applies that if you're going to revisit the Hamilton one from a week ago, why not revisit, given Verstappen's a role model, this one from 2 years ago that nobody cared about? Now, sure, the stewards had their hands full with exactly the implications of this crash between the two drivers, but at the end of the day, they both went out of the race, so it doesn't really matter. And you can say, okay, well, Massey got fired after 2021, so it's a different story. This is Bahrain 2022. No Massey, of course, over there. This is when Perez's car, the engine fails basically on the first corner of the final lap of the Grand Prix. His rear tyres lock, he spins around. Hamilton, Russell go through. You guys know the rest. This is, of course, after the Grand Prix is over, so technically it's still a live track. There's still cars on the track. Yes, the checkered flag is out, so the cars are driving around slowly, but here's Perez walking on the live track. He could have got out of there much quicker than this and stayed to the sidelines. He didn't. He was on the track. Again, this wasn't talked about. It wasn't looked at, but as soon as Hamilton does it, all of a sudden it's front page news, apparently. So I don't really understand why the difference here, and this is the problem, that people already feel like the FIA and the governing body treat certain drivers differently, especially at times Hamilton, whether you think that's in the positive or the negative ends. This does not add to the perception that there's one set of rules for some set of drivers and another set of rules for Lewis Hamilton, despite the fact that that really shouldn't be the case. And if he is more of a role model than others, doesn't mean that those other characters we mentioned you know, especially the likes of Verstappen and Perez, you know, they're big role models in their own right. It's not like, you know, even Logan Sargeant is a big role model to many, I'm sure, young American drivers. And these guys absolutely are. So, yeah, what do you guys think about this? Definitely controversial. And, you know, it makes me wonder, because during last season, a lot of the big talking point was around Hamilton and the jewelry gate, right? When he had this nose piercing, the FIA was saying, no, it's got to go. We can't allow it. Even though other drivers were still allowed to wear their wedding rings, that was no problem at all. They could use that during the race. So there was some exceptions, and Hamilton was like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I've got this nose piercing, it really doesn't matter. I think he eventually got it surgically removed or something like that anyway, and he complied, but he was definitely pushing back a lot. You guys remember he turned up to the interview, I'm guessing here in Miami, with 3 watches, about like 8 or 9 rings, all these necklaces, right, loads of jewelry on, just to take the mick. And there was a feeling that Hamilton was getting targeted deliberately by this clampdown, whereas other drivers with other things, and as I say, the wedding rings and stuff, wasn't even looked at, whereas they kept pushing Hamilton on the jewelry thing for a long time. And people were like, is this, you know, if this wasn't Hamilton, would they be doing this? And maybe they would, I don't know, but it doesn't feel quite right. So yeah, very much intrigued to your thoughts on that. I wonder what they'll do about this. Is it just clumsy wording, or is this a little bit of a Freudian slip in terms of the way they actually think about Hamilton compared to the other drivers? A couple of interesting things to mention for you guys before we close out the video here. Firstly, Nico Rosberg. We know that Nico Rosberg said a while ago now that he heard that old Norris is on the move somewhere as soon as next season. No updates on that yet, and probably that's not going to be the case, because we're pretty sure that if Perez is kicked out or retires or whatever, then Ricciardo will be the man to come through. He does say, though, that Alex Albon will be the ideal man to replace Perez, which might be true. I know that Helmut Marko has said that that's not going to happen and they're not going to come back to a relationship there at Red Bull. But as we saw yesterday, Christian Horner apparently wants Helmut Marko gone and wants the sole decision-making power over there at Red Bull. So we might see this happen still. It's definitely possible. Sargeant is definitely under pressure. Sargeant also made some comments on this and said that his results need to be put into context, because back in the day when, let's say, Hamilton or Alonso are coming through, they got lots of testing. Definitely true. Those drivers back then got way more testing than the current crop of drivers do when they first come into the sport. But at the same time, does that fully, you know, excuse his relatively poor performances? Liam Lawson, sure, he has had more practice than, let's say, some of the other drivers. He's been around for a few years in the lower categories, and then this year was driving Super Formula. So, you know, sure, he had some prep work, but still, what Logan Sargeant has achieved compared to what Liam Lawson achieved in those few races was kind of paled in comparison. And then Piastri, he wasn't driving anything last year. He was sitting on the sidelines, comes in and is doing a stellar job, and is clearly, Piastri, putting pressure on Norris, right? Beating him in both qualifyings and in the sprint and the Grand Prix in Qatar. Norris was due to get that sprint pole position as well. Then he was pushing really hard, went off at the final corner. So feels like Piastri's putting the pressure on Norris, and that's a very impressive thing to do. And he won his first race at the sprint before Norris did. So, you know, that's Piastri, one of the best rookie seasons we've seen in quite some time. So yeah, does this excuse Sargeant? I don't know. I know there was a comment from Gerhard Berger who said that, you know, don't know what you're talking about, mate. Basically, just get in the car and drive it. And if you can't do that, you're not good enough type thing, which is the way that some drivers will think about it. Sargeant has a point to an extent, but I don't think it means that rookies can't come in with limited testing and prove their worth if they are very talented, as, well, some are probably more talented than Logan Sargeant, it's got to be said. And one other name just to mention as we were discussing Mercedes, Kimi Antonelli. He's been a name that's gone around for some time. He's in the Mercedes Junior program, and he's just won a race in Zandvoort today to win the FIA, the Formula Regional Championship today, and had a pretty big comeback drive apparently as well. Didn't watch the race live, but this guy's very impressive, and the question is, where's he going to go next year? Is he going to be at F3? Could they even graduate him to straight to F2, which would be really interesting? So yeah, definitely a star for the future there, and I imagine he would be pretty confident in the coming years if he was chucked straight into an F1 car and be able to deliver the goods, but a bit too young for that as yet. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.